Hey y'all! In this episode, I'll be sharing 6 key insights that I've gained over the years while pursuing shelling as a hobby. These lessons have helped me become a more skilled, informed, and mindful shell collector. I hope they can do the same for you. And toward the end of the episode, I'll also share 4 of my personal favorite locations in Florida to find shells. This is an episode you don't want to miss. Tip number 1. Take a moment to ask yourself what you hope to get from your shelling experience. I like to call myself an enthusiast shell collector. And by enthusiast, I mean shelling is a huge part of my life. In essence, shelling brings me an immense sense of joy. I love finding new and exciting species that I don't yet have in my personal collection. And I'm always looking for the next opportunity to travel to a new place to find shells. But that's just me. There are many different levels of interest and commitment in the hobby of shell collecting. Some find joy in a more casual shelling experience while on a family vacation, for example. While some find joy trekking miles through thick sand or enduring harsh weather conditions, just in the hope of finding that one shell that they're looking for.
Unfortunately, we have to trudge through the snow to get there. So my buddy is moving through the ice and snow here.
Regardless of where you may fall on the spectrum of interest and commitment to this hobby, the goal here is to help you learn how to shell. And understanding that there are certain methods and practices which you can deploy to help better predict the outcomes of your shelling adventures. But first ask yourself, what do you want from your shelling experience? Tip number 2. Location, location, location. Not so fast. It's not all about location. In the art of shelling, it's important to realize that where you go isn't nearly as crucial as you might think, or as you may have heard. The truth is, there's no magic beach. Shells come and go with the tides, and it's impossible to predict exactly where they'll wash up. And while you can help to increase your chances of finding great shells with some preliminary research and planning, external factors beyond our control will always determine when, where, and even if shells will appear at any given spot at any given time. Since shelling conditions are largely influenced by natural factors like tides and weather, knowing a general location is just part of the equation. For example, shelling tends to be better after a large storm, like a tropical storm or a cold front.
All right, I'm gonna head back down the beach. I'm gonna leave the rocks. It's too wet and it's too cold. I'll let you know. We'll take a look at all the shells that we found.
If you can plan your shelling around these events, you may have a better chance of finding shells. It's also important to remember that even some of the most famous shelling locations, like Sanibel Island for example, may have no shells on its beaches on certain days if the conditions aren't right. On the flip side, some places you'd never expect to be great for shelling might have an abundance of shells washing up, depending on the conditions.
Okay, I was just about to stop and I found this. Oh my gosh, it's a Stimson's Colis in perfect shape. Okay, so I never, ever find these on Pine Point Beach.
Being intentional about pre-planning your shelling trips and getting out to explore to achieve your own informed assessment is perhaps the most valuable tool that you can bring with you on your shelling journey. Where you go does matter, but it's not the only factor. Understanding the bigger picture of how external and natural forces influence conditions at a beach is far more important than just asking, what beach should I go to? Okay, so there is a small caveat here. where a specific location can indeed be the determining factor for finding shells. There are some locations that I call unicorn locations. A unicorn location is a spot where there are unique variables which are specific to the location itself. Such locations may occur naturally, like those that are created as the result of regional topography or through geological impact. They may also be created as a result of human activity, like through dredging or industrial activities. One example of a unicorn location is a fishing harbor, a hyper-localized spot where shells in good condition can be cast out of fishing nets or traps into shallow water by fishermen or lobstermen. Finding such locations can take a little bit of research, but for a dedicated shell collector, the potential for a rewarding shelling experience is always an adventure worth pursuing. I've personally visited a few of these spots in both Maine and the Caribbean, but they can be found anywhere that such local fishing activities occur. Another example of a unicorn location is a fossil bed or a fossil deposit. These spots typically occur anywhere ancient sediments become disturbed by natural forces like wave action, erosion, or human activity. Holden Beach, North Carolina, is a great example of a unicorn location. In 2022, prehistoric offshore sediments were disturbed by local dredging and renourishment projects. These disturbances caused ancient fossil sea biscuits and other buried organic artifacts, like shells, to wash up with remarkable abundance. Due to the unique local conditions that have resulted from the dredging, Holden Beach has gained quite a bit of notoriety in the shelling and fossil community, so beachcombing at a spot like this can be highly competitive. The Presumpscot Formation in the state of Maine is another related example. Stretching across coastal areas of Maine and New Hampshire, the Presumpscot Formation is a regional geological feature consisting of ancient marine clay sediments that were carried and deposited by glacial meltwater during the last ice age. Shells that were buried in these marine clay sediments can occasionally become exposed through natural processes or through human activities like excavation work. While these marine shell fossils aren't uniformly present throughout the entirety of the Presumpscot Formation, any of these marine clay exposures can potentially contain beautiful fossilized shell specimens like Arctic whelks, Neptunes, scallops, and other gorgeous shells that once lived and thrived along Maine's coast 10,000 years ago when the region was much colder. Tip number 3. Try to go shelling at times when there are fewer people on the beach. The general idea here is that the busier a beach is, the harder it will be to find shells, and the higher the likelihood will be that you'll face greater competition from others who might be shelling in the same area. Don't get me wrong, shelling a popular beach on a warm sunny day can be a treasured experience, and I've shelled popular spots at busy times, but it's not what I would consider an ideal time to find shells.
All right, so I'm at the actual cockle shell beach today here, and walking along. Normally I don't shell on a beach where there's, tons of people. That's a real tourist area.
And this is true, especially if you're hoping to find that one shell that everyone else also might be hoping to find. Typically, the times when it's less desirable to be at a beach are the times where there will be fewer people out and about searching for shells. I've found that if you want to maximize your chances at finding great shells, there are better times to visit. Early mornings, especially around dawn, can be some of the best times for shelling, particularly at popular shelling spots before the crowds arrive. During these times, you'll encounter fewer people and you'll have first access to anything that the tides have washed up overnight. I can't emphasize this one enough. On countless occasions, I've found amazing shells simply because I got to the beach early and had first access to all that the previous night's tide had pushed ashore. When the weather isn't ideal, be it rain, cold temperatures, or otherwise inclement conditions, it may seem like shelling isn't an option. However, keep in mind that most people won't venture out when the weather is unpleasant. This means if you're willing to brave the elements, you'll face less competition and might discover some hidden treasures. With that said, always prioritize your own safety. You should never shell during an electrical storm or when conditions are unsafe. No shell or beach find is ever worth risking your well-being. Tip number 4. Low tide generally is the best time to shell. However, it's not always easy or practical to plan shelling trips around the tides. The primary reason that low tide is often considered the best time to shell at a beach is because there's simply more beachy real estate available. A low tide reveals additional sections of a beach as a result of retreating tides. Because there is more area exposed, there are more places to explore looking for shells. For example, low tides can reveal features like rock outcroppings and sandbars that would normally be covered at a high tide. Considering all of this, you should never discount the high tide rack line that the previous high tide washed up. Sometimes these areas can have some spectacular beauties just sitting, waiting to be discovered.
Oh my gosh. This made it all worth it. Look at that beautiful hawk wing. Oh my gosh. Wow.
I always say, the best time to get to the beach on a shell collecting adventure is when you can get to the beach. No more, no less. Tip number 5. Do thorough research before your shelling adventure, leaving no shell unturned in your quest for information. A dedicated shell collector will usually research and plan their shelling trip in advance, which is why they're often able to consistently find some of the best treasures time and time again. Planning and researching your trips ahead of time can help you have more success. And while proper research and preparation can enhance your shelling experience, it's important to remember that there's never any guarantee you'll find exactly what you're looking for.
Okay. So I usually have pretty good luck on the east coast of Florida. Today, it's not one of those days.
Sometimes it does simply come down to luck. And even the most experienced shell collectors can often return empty-handed.
Okay, so this is a little bit different than what we usually do when we're shelling. Usually we're looking through piles, but today we're gonna look on the shore here and see if the waves can provide us any spots where we can get some shells.
Over the years, I've learned that adopting certain practices can make a huge difference. So, have you got a shelling destination in mind? Be sure to research the area beforehand. What will the tides be on the day of your trip? Are you planning to go on a weekend or a weekday? Generally, weekends tend to be busier times, so keep that in mind. Check local maps for the spots you desire to explore. Are there any nearby features that could concentrate shells or create ideal conditions for them to gather? Think jetties, docks, sandbars, offshore reefs, the list goes on. Super pro tip. If you're unfamiliar with the area that you're visiting on a shelling trip, Google Earth can be a valuable tool. I've used it many times during my planning process for shelling trips, especially in places that I'm not familiar, to scout potential spots that may be good for shelling. And while it's not always foolproof, Google Earth is generally a very helpful resource. Make an effort to be aware of your beachcombing footprint. While enjoying your experience, it's important to be mindful of what and how much you may end up removing from a beach. As a general friendly reminder, removing any organic material from a natural habitat does have the potential to disrupt the local environment.
These are nice, but I've already got a couple, so I want to be mindful and make sure to not take too much of something. But I will take in that beautiful view.
So it's important to be informed, respectful, and to collect responsibly wherever you go. It's taken me a long time to learn how to shell. And honestly, there are plenty of times when I still don't quite get it right. But that's part of the process. We're always learning. For me, shell collecting is a journey, not a destination. Like any hobby or activity that you want to improve at, what you get out of shelling depends on what you're willing to put into it. It takes time and effort to hone your skills. And even with all of the research and preparation in the world, there will still be times when you come back empty-handed. Which brings me to my last tip. Tip number 6. Go shelling without expectations. I know, this is easier said than done. The truth is, it's impossible to predict shelling conditions with absolute certainty. And that's okay. Maybe you won't find that one shell that you've been searching for, or perhaps you won't find any shells at all. When we set our expectations only for the outcome we want or are hoping for, it can be a disappointment if those expectations aren't met. For me, the real value of the experience lies in simply getting to the beach, grabbing the opportunity to take a deep breath, and being fully present in the moment, right there, right then. That is what truly matters. Beyond providing shell collecting experiences on Solace and Shelling, these moments of mindfulness and appreciation are what I consider the foundation of my channel. Now that we've covered some great shelling tips, I'd like to take a moment to share a few of my personal favorite shelling spots in Florida. I realize that many people visit the state on a short vacation, just looking for some general places to find some treasured keepsakes to bring home. So I always want to keep that in mind. This list isn't ranked, nor is it an official guide to the best shelling spots in Florida. These are simply locations that I've shelled at numerous times over the past decade, and that I'd recommend to anyone seeking an enjoyable shelling experience in Florida. "10,000 Islands, Collier County." The 10,000 Islands are an archipelago chain of islands in extreme southwest Florida, stretching from Marco Island south to the western flanks of the Everglades. When talking about shelling in the 10,000 Islands, I'm specifically referencing a few of the most northern islands in the chain, such as Dickman's Island, Kais Island, Morgan Key, and Cape Romano, as these are the most accessible and frequented by shellers. Though the potential for great shelling exists pretty much anywhere throughout this island chain, outside, of course, the protected boundaries of the Everglades. There are quite a few local shelling tour companies that provide daily shelling trips to some of the islands in the vicinity of Marco, and I've been on a couple of these trips. However, I usually try to get out to do some primitive camping here when I can, for a more secluded and personalized experience. But that's just my preference. The entire area is largely undeveloped and is generally considered one of the best regions to collect shells in the state of Florida, for a couple reasons. For one, shells tend to roll up from the shallow Gulf waters and onto the untouched beaches here with incredible abundance. Additionally, there are many unique shell species endemic to this region, which means that some of the shells found here are found only here and nowhere else in the world. These factors make finding shells in the 10,000 Islands an absolute thrilling adventure. Cayo Costa State Park, Lee County. Cayo Costa has always been one of my favorite places to visit for shell collecting in Florida. Located about 10 miles north of Sanibel Island, Cayo Costa is a mostly uninhabited barrier island with a beautiful state park, Cayo Costa State Park, situated on the northern half of the island. Each time that I've visited Cayo Costa State Park since 2013, I've tent camped in the primitive camping section of the park. In my opinion, this is how wild Florida was meant to be experienced. Beautiful sunsets, stargazing, and of course, amazing shelling. Unfortunately, Cayo Costa was severely damaged by Hurricane Ian in 2022, and the state park has been working on recovery efforts over the past couple of years. The campground here in particular sustained great damage and has not yet been fully restored, but the state park itself has reopened for day visits for those with private vessels. The Jupiter-Juno region. There's no shells on Florida's east coast. You've probably heard that statement before, but it's simply not accurate. While it's certainly true that shelling here is quite often hit or miss, and not as consistent as it is on Florida's Gulf Coast, when the shells are here, it can be amazing. One of the appeals of shelling in this region is that the tropical Gulf Stream current flows northward just offshore here, and can sometimes help to bring Caribbean shells and other types of shells that can't be found in other areas of Florida onto shore. As a gentle caveat for shelling in this area, it's important to know that the shell piles come and go here whimsically with the strong tides of the Atlantic Ocean, and the waves will often sweep everything back out to sea just as quickly as they wash them up in the first place. Additionally, walking the beach here can be a bit more difficult because the sand is coarse and thick, and your feet can sink in deep. With this said, if the conditions do line up well, shelling anywhere in this general region can offer up some great shell collecting opportunities. I personally love shelling this part of Florida because I never know what I'm going to find. And of course, for me, it's always about the thrill of the adventure and the possibility that may await. Pasagrille, St. Petersburg. In my opinion, one of the single best shelling locations in the state of Florida, and possibly the single most consistent place to find shells in Florida on this list. Situated directly north of Shell Key Preserve in St. Petersburg, Florida, Pasagrille is not a general location, but is actually more of an exact location. If you're looking for an X marks the spot on your next Florida shelling trip, Pasagrille might just be it. I've shelled here dozens of times over the past decade, and it's almost always a great shell collecting experience. The swift moving ebb of tides here often will push massive amounts of shells onto the beach, given the right conditions. A hopeful shell collector can find anything from lightning whelks, murex, Florida horseconchs, and tulip shells, just to name a few. Pasagrille has gained an incredible amount of attention and notoriety over the past couple of years. As a result, shelling here can be quite competitive. My best advice to shell here is to go early in the morning, around dawn, to find the best stuff that the previous night's tide washed up. Low tide here anytime is also a great time to go. Thank you so much for taking the time to come along with me today on a different type of adventure. I hope that after watching this episode, you feel more empowered with both the tools and the knowledge to craft and drive your own unique shelling adventure. Remember, no matter what you may or may not find, it's always worth the experience. If you appreciated this content, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And I'll always see you on that next shelling adventure.